Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Ranging over time and space with astonishing agility, the world has transformed in leaps and bounds over the past 2,500 years. Although the world faces momentum challenges, the development of technology has accelerated to meet them. But some inventions, like social media and AI, have us pondering where civilization is heading for. Can philosophy, defined as the love of wisdom, answer some of our most profound questions, or is it outdated? During the 24th World Congress of Philosophy in Beijing, I sat down with Dermot Moran, president of the International Federation of Philosophical Societies. He shared with us his insights between the tides of philosophy and our world. It's chaotic, many believe, today's world. But the question is it to a philosopher?
The world has mostly been chaos for philosophers, and that is why they are looking to understand it. Because many philosophers in the West and the East, they flourish in a time of crisis, because they are forced to come up with new ideas to resolve the problems. Well, I think a good example was that in the ancient Greece, Socrates was condemned to death because his ideas did not suit with the city of the time, and he was possibly the most prominent thinker. Plato was exiled. He was even kidnapped for a while by pirates. That's in the West. And St. Augustine was writing his great book, The City of God, when the barbarians were attacking Rome. So Hegel was writing one of his books when Napoleon was sending cannon fire into the city. So they're writing in a time of war, often.
Many of them were, quote-unquote, the stars of their generation and their time. Could they still be?
I think this is one of the great achievements of both China and Greece, is that they produce philosophy as the highest expression of the cultural wisdom. These traditions, East and West, produce philosophy, a kind of self-reflection. And that requires very little except just the capacity for people to talk and to think. So it's somebody will say it's something that you use a mobile art form. You can bring it with you when you are traveling. So from that point of view, philosophy is a high expression of culture. Is it still? Well, I think that's the big challenge today, that since the development of the technological sciences, people in some respects are dominated by news and the everyday cycle of political events, and they don't have time to step back to reflect. But it's still necessary that they do so. So I think philosophy is still required.
Are you blaming the technologies?
I think that perhaps philosophers were slow to recognize the threat that technology was imposing upon the human life. We thought it was just another instrument to use. But we didn't realize that with this, it's not just a change in the tool, it's a change in the whole context of learning and understanding. And we really still don't understand how that is working for us. And I think that there's probably great opportunities, but also great threats in the use of technology, especially for philosophy.
I'm getting worried. Are you saying philosophers still could not grasp exactly what is the essence of technology these days and how they are actually transcending our lives or transforming our lives?
That was actually, that very title, The Essence of Technology, is an essay by the German philosopher Martin Heidegger. And he made that exact point, that philosophy gave birth to science. So philosophy thought it understood science. But in a way, with technology, which is a kind of second byproduct of science, we created a monster that we don't understand anymore. This is the, you have many stories of science fiction of the scientist who creates a monster. And in a way, we created this monster called technology. Now, we can't go back. We have to use it just like the way we have to use electricity. We're not going to go back to some Stone Age or Dark Age. But we need to reflect on how our nature itself is being challenged by this new technology.
Are you being challenged?
Very much so.
As a philosopher?
Yes, because I believe Heidegger here is correct, that he said that technology isn't just a tool, it's a new framework, and it affects all our thinking. Actually, he thought it was probably going to lead to the end of philosophy. I don't agree with that. I think that philosophy will continue, but it will have to make some kind of accommodation with technology. And in one way, one aspect of this has been, for example, the environmental movement. And the other one is the theme of this conference. How do we keep our humanity in this age of what they call post-humanism?
Exactly. We've been talking a lot, if you look at the world, artificial intelligence. So people, actually, many of the jobs, many of the skills, many of the talents can be duplicated. And probably the robots could perform even better than we do in a small given time. So that also makes us to think, what is the real essence of being a human being? The values, the wisdom, the interconnectedness, our relationships. And I wonder whether philosophy could really catch up with the time.
Well, I think that's required. I mean, let me give you an example. We've had some successes in philosophy.
Okay. Give me some sunshine.
All right,
there
here's
we
one.
go.
Here's one.
All right.
At a certain point, every culture had slaves. And after many, many discussions, it has become now the common view that slavery is wrong. And that was largely due to the arguments of the philosophers. And for the same reason, we now have to ask ourselves...
What was the argument?
Well, the argument was that they were all essentially human beings, that there were not two levels of human beings, but that we are all equally human. And actually that argument was already there in ancient Greece. There was already some arguments against slavery in ancient Greece. Aristotle argued in favor of slavery, but others argued against it. But by the 18th century, the argument was strongly accepted against slavery. Okay? So, however, we haven't been very good at in relation to recognizing, for example, the rights of animals. Higher animals that are very close to human beings deserve better treatment than we have given them. Probably that's coming next. And then the next question will be, should we extend some kind of rights, as it were, to robots and to artificial life forms? Well, I think we're a long way from that, but I think we'll have to face that challenge.
Professor Moran, if you think about philosophers in ancient times, they are talented in all ways. There are scientists, there are philosophers, there are archaeologists, they are architects, they are everything.
Yes.
Which means cross-subject has been the nature of philosopher
Yes.
for a long time until recently.
Yes.
Are we going to see that once again?
That's my view of philosophy. As you know, philosophy in the past was exactly what you said, that Aristotle, for example, it not only was a great philosopher, but a great biologist, especially of marine biology. He was extraordinary. But leaving that aside, now, of course, science has grown so fast that no one person could know all the sciences. So now philosophy is a kind of meta-subject. We are looking like an overview of what science does. We can't expect the philosopher to also be a great physicist and a great astronomer and archaeologist. But we can hope that philosophy will have an overview. By the way, it still does in the universities, because PhD means Doctor of Philosophy. And so it means that philosophy is still the name for the advanced knowledge in whatever area.
If you got a chance to ask an ultimate scientist one question from a philosopher, what would you ask?
What is meaning?
Wow.
That's what I would ask.
Do you think is that their subject?
I think that scientists normally forget that they are working in the domain of meaning. And they think they are working with things that are outside in the real world. But in fact, we only understand the world through our own categories and meanings. But we don't know how we produce them. So actually, in a lot of the sciences now, they say consciousness is the hard problem. I think an even harder problem is the problem of where does meaning come from.
The other thing is about geopolitics. The reason why we see the world in such a chaotic situation right now is because this is almost the very first time after the Cold War that ideas to begin their fight. And there are newcomers, new kids on the block, and therefore the existing system feels being challenged. Professor Moran, of course in history, this is nothing new. And yet, to a philosopher of today, is there some wisdom that we can really rely on?
Well, I think you're right that these changes have been going in cycles for many thousands of years. I mean, I am a child of the post-Second World War period, and in Europe, the building of the concept of a Union of European States. And they are still struggling with this idea.
And the baby boomers in the United States.
Yes, and they had this idea of peace and protest against global wars and so on. And in the 60s, for example, there was again, philosophers, by the way, led the campaign against nuclear armament. So clearly that philosophy has always responded to these challenges. But at the same time, philosophers have tried also to understand, is there some kind of logic, perhaps a dialectic, as Hegel or Marx called it, in these movements? Sometimes, like during the Roman Empire, or indeed in the Chinese emperor times, everyone fell under one rule or one language, and then it splits into the period of the warring states, or the period of lots of different countries in Europe having nationalist identities, and then the people realize that's a dangerous thing and they move back. So perhaps we can find a logic in this apparent chaos. And so the philosophy of history is very interesting from that point of view. So
what is politics to philosophers? Even you see today, particularly some of the very charismatic politicians existing on the world stage. Of course, I've been using a very polite word to describe them.
Yes.
So what about them in the eyes of philosophers?
This is what philosophers have tried to do, you know. There is a phrase that people use today, to speak truth to power. And I think that has been the function of philosophers from the time of Socrates and Confucius, to give some advice and wisdom to the ruling princes.
If they listen.
If they listen, but even Confucius was very aware that most of the time you're talking to a deaf ears. That's why you're looking for the one hope that you might be able to find the wise prince, the wise king.
That's why you travel so much around so many countries and nations in order to find that open ears.
That's right, and you know the same thing exactly for Plato. Plato was always dreaming of founding the perfect state, and so you know he went to Italy to try. He went there to try to establish a perfect state, but it didn't succeed. So sadly, we learned the lesson that human beings perhaps have agendas that won't listen to philosophy. But nevertheless, that doesn't a reason for philosophy to stop saying the truth or seeking the truth.
Some of my journalistic friends have the habit now to get up every morning and check the Twitter to see what that guy has been saying over the night. Of course, that's only one of those phenomena that people have these days about how politics, personalities are brushing off their life.
Yes.
To a philosopher, how do you see this phenomenon that we are so much impacted by someone who is not necessarily that relevant, actually, to the real lives of us, and yet this phenomenon with the technologies, we are eager to know something that is actually not that important?
Yes, that is of course the nature of modernity, especially the modern media.
Yes.
Every philosopher in the 20th century has reflected on this problem, that we are living in an age of mass communication, and maybe that means that what we learn is not so important. It's a kind of noise. Again, many philosophers like Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse, the German philosopher, talks about, he said, the one-dimensionality. So there's no longer a depth dimension. Everything is always just a superficial news story. Even the idea of news, that we only want to hear what is new, is a kind of psychological some condition for us now.
Spring, autumn, and warring states period of time, which is one of the time a lot of philosophical thoughts flourished. You see there are so many schools of thoughts. It really eventually, depending on their relationship and partnership with politics, that somewhat apparently decide on the fate of these philosophical thoughts.
Yes.
So what exactly to you, Professor, is the relationship between real philosophers, philosophies that survived, and politics?
Oh my God, that is a very difficult question.
I know, we could talk for 2 days,
yes,
right?
and of course it's one that philosophers have talked about. For example, French philosopher Michel Foucault, he likes to use the word knowledge power. He runs the two words together, which probably describes exactly the kind of dynamic that you've been talking about. Philosophies come to dominance largely depend on the political support that they get. But that's not always the case, you know. It's kind of an accident of history that the Roman Empire became Christian, for example. The Romans, having suppressed Christianity, then adopted it, and it became the official language of the empire and spread across Europe. Similar things happened with the cultures. So in China, I think myself that just like in the West, there are many, many different philosophies: Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Marxism. But there is something special about Confucianism that I think is reflective of you know, Chinese culture. I think it's probably the strongest of those traditions within Chinese culture. So I think it'll continue to flourish. People say the same thing, that the sort of what they call Judeo-Christian values are very deeply ingrained in the West. So I think that's something that maybe is deeper than than just the superficial power structures.
Professor Moran, this year is special if you look at philosophy. Of course, 200 years anniversary of Karl Marx. That's been celebrated around the world. He has been a transcending figure, at least in recent human history. On the other hand, this is also the year for China's reform and opening up. So this is all reflecting in the same year. I think to a philosopher like you, it must be quite interesting.
It's very interesting, and actually coming to China, we're beginning to understand more how the figure of Marx is understood. You can say, in a way, that Marx is Chinese in China. He's not the German philosopher.
Chinese version already.
There's a Chinese version. So Chinese Marxism is a very distinctive kind of Marxism, and it is not well understood in the West. So we don't fully understand it. And I think my own understanding in talking to people here is that it shows many, it comes to join many aspects of traditional Chinese culture, like the idea that there's a kind of dynamics in change. And that we have to recognize that, and that Marx's view of dialectics is a way of expressing what may in the past have been expressed by yin-yang, or kind of dialectics of affirmation and negation. So in China there's a kind of synthesis between Chinese and Marxist thought.
That's so interesting,
that's very
isn't it?
Distinctive, yeah. And it's something that we don't know much about in the West, so we're looking forward to learning more about this.
I would like to invite you to help us understand our age today, if you can, with 2 or 3 adjectives to a philosopher.
Well, challenging, you have to say. This age is challenging. I think it's terrifying. We are at the brink of very, very major changes. We don't know where the future is going. And I think maybe wonderful, because philosophy is wonder.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Professor Moran, for being with us. All the best.
Thank you.
A great success to the Congress, of course.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's my exclusive interview with Professor Demotte Moran on the sideline of the 24th World Congress of Philosophy, co-organized by the Peking University. Well, that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and